The pig farmer, Canada's most evil serial killer.
March 11th, 2004. A Canadian family in Vancouver have just finished a delicious dinner of pork loin wrapped in smoked bacon when a provincial health official
don't like bacon, so yuck. But let's keep it
appears on the
pushing.
TV and announces some very worrying news. That meal that they just wolfed down might have had a secret ingredient, the flesh and guts of numerous murdered women. Meat
Only women?
that might make them seriously ill. When they heard that news, one of Canada's most prolific and demented serial killers was in custody. No thanks to the Canadian cops who seemed to always allow this guy to keep on killing. Did they?
Okay.
That's doubtful, but what is not doubtful is that this is one of the most disturbing, perplexing, and nauseating serial killer cases in history. A story that might contain some extremely dark secrets. Robert Pickton was a meat lover. His entire life was centered around meat.
Hey, me and him, we got something in common though. We got something in common. Hey.
Almost from the day he was born. Seems he couldn't get enough of the stuff, and he certainly wasn't too picky about where it came from.
Hey, I can't get enough of meat either. Oh, oh my goodness, I feel him on that one. I'm up on Twitch right now. Link is in the description, so you should come join. Because if you don't...
Born on October 24th, 1949, Pickton cut his teeth on the family pig farm 17 miles to the east of downtown Vancouver.
Okay.
As with many serial killers, his childhood was far from pleasant. To understand the extremely revolting things you'll hear in this show, you need to know what shaped this madman. He wasn't always a monster. Little Robert, or Willie as he was unaffectionately known, was molded into a beast by perhaps the worst parents a boy could ever have.
Oh. Why was he running beside the pigs?
Willie and his young brother David grew up on the farm, while their sister Linda was sent away when she was young. Her parents said the farm life wasn't suited for a young girl. They were absolutely right. This story is about Willie, but bear in mind...
So why'd y'all have a kid if the farm life's not for her? What'd you have a job
as
for?
we tell you this tale, that his siblings might have also embraced a dark streak. Willie and David slaved away on the pig farm from a very young age. Their father, Leonard, born in England in 1896, was a very violent man. He ignored the kids as much as possible, interacting with them only to dish out the occasional physical and psychological abuse. Leonard was not a nice man. Evident in one story that Willie would tell police many years later. It was about this time that he was 12 and bought a 3-week-old calf. He liked the calf and made it his pet. Then one day he came home from school and it wasn't there. He asked his dad about it and he was told, "Oh, it must have got out." Willie replied, "How can it get out the door?" His father remained silent. Willie ran to the barn where he found his half-butchered pet hanging from a meat hook. He told,
"For what? It was a calf too. 3 weeks. He killed it just for the fun of it. Wasn't even fully grown."
His mother, Louise, "I was going to keep that calf for the rest of my life, and now it's gone." Crying, he told her, "I was going to sleep with it." He loved that calf, which was now a butchered piece of meat.
You were going to sleep with it? You know, maybe you weren't all right from the beginning.
Somewhere in the kid's mind, the trauma he experienced had connected love and violence, affection and slaughter. He would tell this story later in life as if that pet calf was the most important thing that ever happened to him. He explained to detectives that losing his beloved calf made him realize from a young age, life goes around and around. You're only here today, you're not here tomorrow. You should keep those details in mind, since Willie's actions later in life are still a matter of debate. His childhood might hold the keys to what is a very murky mystery.
Wait, what do you mean his matters are up to debate? Did he not kill a bunch of people? What is debatable about it? I'm confused.
Unsurprisingly, these kids stayed away from their father, but their mother, Louise, born in Alberta in 1912, was also the embodiment of parental mismanagement. This gruesome
Well, yeah, look at who she married. Look at the father. Yes, we see that.
Guardian was loud, controlling, and obnoxious. She didn't look too good for her age, her balding head usually covered by a scarf.
Hold on, since when did looks have to do with taking care of somebody? Maybe I missed something.
Of parental mismanagement. This gruesome guardian was loud, controlling, and obnoxious. She didn't look too good for her age, her balding head usually covered by a scarf, hair sprouting out of her chin, and her mouth containing just a few rotten teeth. She wouldn't have looked or sounded out of place in the movie Deliverance.
Wow.
She called Willie slow, a boy she believed was not quite right in the head. blaming the fact that when he was born, his umbilical cord had wrapped around his neck and cut off his oxygen. All she ever seemed to do was shout at him. She was often heard screaming, "Get over here, now!" and he always came running. She worked both kids like coal miners, up at dawn every day to slaughter.
You call him slow. But he learned how to juggle. He's running with both rocks in his hand and coming towards you. Someone slow can't do that. You know what I'm saying? He's awfully fast in the mind. You're hating on him.
Running. She worked both kids like coal miners, up at dawn every day to slop out the pig feces. 200 pigs plus the 8 cows the kids had to slop out and milk in the morning. Both kids stank like something
That's that
rotten,
farm life.
since Luis never taught them the importance of regular bathing. Willie was
What?
taunted in school for that. The other kids at Millside Elementary named him Stinky Piggy.
Your nickname was Stinky Piggy? They forced you to be on the farm all day and you didn't bathe? Yo.
And when he got home, he was faced with more hard work, often witness to the slaughtering of livestock. Death was always around him, but blood and guts didn't bother young Willie. When the adults were angry at him, he'd sometimes go hide under the gutted pig carcasses. Forevermore, death, blood, and viscera would for Willie be associated with safety. The Pictons were very well known in their town, Port Coquitlam, population 50,000, for having one of the biggest pig farms and slaughterhouses in the area.
Okay,
if you
so
wanted
they
pork,
breaded.
LF Picton Ranch Poultry and Pigs was the place to go.
They probably
When people
breaded.
visited, they'd see the feral, unwashed kids running around a house that always seemed on the verge of collapse. This they couldn't understand. Everyone knew the Pictons had money from selling land. It was as
they
if
breaded.
they enjoyed living in abject filth. Pigs, chicken, ducks, dogs, and the occasional cow wandered around the house, leaving dirt and excrement behind.
Why do y'all live like that?
A farmer
Why?
who lived nearby later recalled, "It was just one shack after another made up of scraps of lumber. I didn't go down there, it was so repulsive." Willie, who had a good memory despite his low IQ, later recalled how when he was 2, there was no running water in the house. At that time, his bedroom was a converted chicken coop where he could lift a floorboard under his bed and get cold water from the spring
Horrible
below.
living conditions,
Despite
bro.
the obvious maltreatment, Louise said she loved Willie dearly. She protected
These
him from his
parents-
father. She
These parents are bad.
doted on him when she wasn't treating him like a slave, feeling sorry for her boy who was put into the special education class at school due to low grades and the fact that he looked and smelled like an animal and didn't talk like other kids who wore nicer clothes. Many of those kids were the children of doctors who worked at the local Essendale mental hospital. One of them many years later admitted, "We were all terrible to the Pictons, especially Robert. No one liked Stinky Willie in school, so he was surprised one day when a girl named Lisa started being nice to him."
How do you tell someone they stink, like that they stink nicely? But okay, let's say you tell someone they stink, but they keep on stinking. Like, you don't want to be around someone who stinks. Like, you're gonna actively avoid them. Like, you tell them once, like, "Hey, you need to scrub your back a little bit harder," but they keep stinking. It's like you don't want to be around someone constantly stinking.
Willie was working in the store his family
Like, if they never fix their stench, of course no one's gonna be around them. No one wants to smell them.
had on Shaughnessy Street in Port Coquitlam, a shop they named the Meat Locker. That day, he stared at Lisa, her face slightly unique as her mother was Chinese and her father Caucasian. She
Her face slightly unique because her mother was Chinese, because she was Asian, basically. That is an interesting way to say biracial.
smiled back at him. The smell didn't repulse her, so he gave her a free hot dog. Many years later, he'd meet Lisa again. They'd become good friends. She was
Did he learn
probably
how to
his
wash
only
now?
friend. Lisa would also hold some of the keys that we talked about that may solve the mystery of Willie.
Okay, so he didn't kill Lisa. I was just about to say, did he eat Lisa?
More on that later. Rather than
Lisa looked bad right there. I'm not gonna lie.
waste his time at school, Luis pulled him out when he was 14. He continued working at the farm and also worked as a butcher, slaving away in the back, cutting meat all day. Willie became very skilled at this. One of the pivotal moments in his life came when his brother David was 16 and learning to drive. For whatever reason, David somehow didn't see a kid walking down the road. The kid was 14-year-old Tim Barrett, who was hit so hard the truck was badly bashed up. Seemed as
He was hit so hard that the truck was bashed up. F the kid. The truck was messed up.
if David had not even slowed down or braked. Instead of doing the right thing and telling the cops, David sped off and went to tell his mother. She raced out to the accident scene,
He hit
looked at the
someone
kid
and
who she
left?
thought was obviously dead, and rolled him into a water-filled ditch about 10 yards from the road. This had a big impact on David and Willie, who already had a warped sense of right and wrong. Tim's parents, Philip and Lois Barrett, reported their son missing. His body was found the next day. The disturbing thing about this is the autopsy revealed he died from drowning, not the injuries sustained when he was hit, although there were significant head injuries and a fractured pelvis. Even so, the pathologist said those injuries would not have killed Tim. Luis was now a killer.
He could have survived. He could have survived, but mom rode that thing. Whoa, that was rude. Rolled him right into the ocean, water, lake. That family is crazy, bro.
David was an accessory, and Willie learned a thing or two about ethics and accountability. David and his mom were both exposed to the investigation due to a mechanic telling police he'd fixed the Picton's truck. But in the end, Luis wasn't charged with a crime, and David only got 4 years probation after being sentenced at a juvenile court. Many years later, Willie would tell this story about how...
Wait. So did they get convicted? No way they got convicted of murder. And no. What?
In the end, Luis wasn't charged with a crime,
She wasn't
and David
charged.
only got 4 years probation after being sentenced at a juvenile court.
But 4 years probation, that means he did hit them. What? How did they...
Many
what?
years later, Willie would tell this
Is that
story
what
about
money
how
does
his
for you?
mother pretty much got away with murder. In 1978, Willie's father, Leonard, passed away at the age of 91, the same year that a fire at the farm killed hundreds of pigs. Then, a year later, Luis also passed away. The kids, including
Jesus.
the sister, inherited the land that was
There's a sister? Oh, the one they sent for adoption.
worth a substantial amount of money. They also each received about $90,000, around $380,000 in today's money.
I knew
that
they were
was
breaded.
small change, though. The farm and its land were now worth close to $1 million, or $4.2 million today. Willie, who was now 20, was suddenly rich, but he
still
remained at the
stinks?
farm as his mother had requested in her will.
Yuck.
Now all the animals were his. He still barely took care of the place and never really got into the old hygiene thing, but he
Yuck.
did make some changes. One of those changes was taking care of the animals he loved. When his favorite horse, Goldie, died, he decapitated it and took the head to a taxidermist. Goldie's stuffed head was still on his bedroom wall years later when the horrors of the Picton farm came to light. Willie had never had a girlfriend. The girl in his family's meat shop, Lisa, was about the closest he'd come to falling in love.
Yeah,
The puppy
'cause
kind, at least. Willie
you
was
need-
aware
you need to
that girls
wash,
were
bro.
disgusted by him, the pig boy who smelled like feces. So he found pen pals. Pen pals didn't know what he smelled or looked like.
Wait, so he stunk, and instead of doing something about it, he just avoided addressing the actual issue. Golly, guys. Golly.
Just prior to his parents dying, the teenager Willie fell for Connie Anderson, a girl he was writing to in
I'm
Pontiac.
surprised he didn't do anything worse yet. Living like that, that is true. So far, he 20 with no bodies to his name? Smelling like that, being ostracized by the school, all alone besides one person who must not be able to smell because they're ignoring his stench. Man.
Michigan. He took a few long road trips to the U.S. where he called on the pen pals in Chicago, Kansas City, and St. Louis. But it was with Connie, a rather heavy-set girl, that he found true love. The two were both oddballs and not popular amongst their peers. They didn't bother with bars and restaurants, they just drove around all the time. Willie
Yeah.
spent 5 weeks with her, and they later got engaged despite never sleeping with each other. The only thing Willie had slept with until then was pigs.
I was about to say his cow.
Pigs he sometime had to slaughter. He seemed
Did he see her as a pig? Yo, Willie's so rude, bro. I'm not gonna lie.
to have trouble differentiating women from swine, which may have been to slaughter. He seemed to have trouble differentiating
I told you. He thought she was a pig.
women from swine,
I told you.
which may have been why he and Connie never reached third base. Fourth base, with Willie, usually meant the meat grinder. One night he told her he couldn't leave the farm forever. He had to go. Years later he told the police she was supposed to come up, but she never did. Neither did he ever go back to Pontiac. Well, that's life, Willie told interrogators decades later.
okay.
Life comes around and goes around. And in between, for Willie at least,
I guess he
there's a
didn't want to
fair
live on
amount
the
of
farm.
bloodshed and pain. He was almost ready, primed to kill, to become a slaughterer and a meat man who would shock the world. Back at the farm, Willie did something unexpected. He opened the place up to the Hells Angels gang that hung around the area. From then on, there were wild parties at the farm. The bikers turned some of it into a chop shop and held cockfights in the barns.
They literally cockfighting, bro. What?
Then Willie was just a weirdo sitting on a lot of money. As long as he let them party, they were good to him. They called the place Piggy Palace, always dumbfounded by Willie's relationship with his pigs, especially his 600-pound boar that would run wild around the place. They called Willie weird and slow. They laughed at him behind his back, but they sure did appreciate the use of his place. It was through the bikers and the parties that Willie met many women who worked the streets and most of the rundown areas of Vancouver. They partied with the bikers, often given the substances that got them through their day. Willie was equally as kind. Well, he seemed kind at first.
Yeah.
In the daytime, Willie would take his meat to West Coast Reduction Rendering Facility, where the non-edible Willie would take his meat.
No further context. What meat is he taking?
To West Coast Reduction Rendering Facility, where the non-edible parts would be rendered into grease to make soap, candy, and cosmetics. Some of it was turned into pet food. Unbeknownst to the facility, it might have been part human. At nighttime, the parties would get louder and louder. This was kind of legal.
Some kid in Vancouver has eaten a human piece lollipop. That is so sick. That is so sick.
In 1996, Willie and David registered a non-profit organization they named Piggy Palace Good Time Society, stating that it was for special events, functions, dances, shows, and exhibitions.
He made a charity to kill women?
Organization in which the brothers used a converted building at the pig farm for hundreds of people to party in, including a regular cast of downtown Vancouver's East Side prostitutes. One of the parties drew 1,800 people.
Ooh.
Young folks danced away the night, oblivious to the danger they were in. It was fertile ground for a serial killer. The brothers fell foul of the law a few times, sometimes for violating city zoning ordinance and other times for holding parties with too many people and for not writing up mandatory financial statements. But Willie didn't cross in the radar of cops for his more violent proclivities until 1997, after he stabbed a prostitute named Wendy Lynn Eistetter. But Willie didn't cross in the radar of cops for his more violent proclivities until 1997, after he stabbed a prostitute named Wendy Lynn Eistetter. Willie was now 48. This woman was certainly not the first that Willie hurt, but it was the first time he got caught. He was sloppy. Her experience tells us something about how Willie worked. He picked Wendy up on the street in eastern downtown Vancouver and offered her $100. She became suspicious when she saw a bra in his van, but she went to his house, which she called a pigsty. She later said something didn't feel right. She explained, "I asked him for a telephone book and he showed me a telephone book. And as I was leaning over the desk looking up a phone number, I could feel behind me." The next thing she knew, there was a handcuff on her arm, but she fought him, managing to pick up a knife, stabbing him near his throat. He screamed, "You bleep, you got me good." He subsequently picked up a knife and stabbed her in the abdomen. The next thing she knew, they were outside fighting near his truck. He had her in his arms as she pleaded, "I have a family. I'll give you $1,000 if you let me go."
He don't care about
She
your
said
money.
he suddenly became heavy against her body as if he were passing out from blood loss. She ran for it, leaving him staggering in the driveway.
Not care about no money,
she was picked up on the highway at 1:45 a.m., seen by the driver Ben Streleski and his girlfriend. She was handcuffed, covered in blood, and holding a knife. Quite a frightening sight for the couple.
Yeah, I was about to say, like, you're not stopping in the road for this. I promise you I'm not. In the middle of the night, I promise you I'm not stopping in the road. Handcuffed with a knife in your hand? Yeah, no, that's all you, buddy.
The last thing Wendy remembers saying to them was, "In case I die, tell them that I stabbed him in the neck." She didn't die. Willie was charged with attempted murder and released on a $2,000 bond after telling the cops she tried to steal from him and had gone bananas in the process.
He was just released after a $2,000. He attempted murder and was released after a $2,000 bond. He attempted murder and he was released.
A few months later, the case was dismissed, which was not unusual for cases involving so-called women of the night. The cops later had to explain this to a disgruntled public, they admitted they dropped the cases because such women with addiction problems didn't make good witnesses. This would come back to bite the Canadian police big time.
And that's why Ted Bundy was able to get away with getting prostitutes, because he knew that people just didn't care about them as much.
Many prostitutes went to the farm. They often knew something dark lurked amongst the piles of animal excrement. And
why would you go to the farm after he had that case, though? Like, I'm not going to say all prostitutes you should know each other. But you typically know some people in the same line of business, and one of them's like, hey, I went here, I got stabbed. I don't know if you should take that chance. That's just me though.
In broken shacks, they'd heard about Weird Willie, who mostly kept a low profile.
Weird Willie's such a crazy
It was common
name.
knowledge amongst the sex workers that Piggy Palace was a dangerous place, but they went there anyway, knowing the booze and whatever else often
So they already knew it was dangerous,
or at least for favors. When they arrived there for the first time, they were greeted by a sign at the farm entrance that read, "This property protected by pit bull with AIDS."
What?
Willie couldn't even get the English right. One woman who went there one time later said that farm was the dregs of the earth. It was a hellhole. She said women went anyway just for what was on offer. She said the cops always knew about what went on there, but they left the place alone for some reason.
Because
they
had
could have
money.
shut it down whenever they wanted to, but they didn't. Many women who survived that farm still wonder why. In the 1980s and the 1990s, scores of women went missing in Vancouver, many of whom worked the streets at night. Such women have been called the less dead, meaning that when they die, no one really cares about them. And in the eyes of society, they hardly existed when they were alive.
Dead?
And when they went missing, they still barely existed. They were less dead in the eyes of the law and in the eyes of conventional society, despite their vulnerability and hardships. After all, they hung out on the east side of downtown, a place known as Low Track and Canada's Skid Row. This 10-block section of the city was an absolute wasteland, where the sidewalks were covered with the rubber and spiked jetsam the women in the attics had dumped in the night. Pimps strolled among the many liquor stores and pawn shops. Biker gangs and Asian cartels openly flaunted their wares. Oddballs like Willie were invisible in this civic failure. Within those 10 blocks were the highest rates of HIV infection in the whole of North America. Young runaways, sometimes referred to as twinkies.
All of North America? All of us? All of us? A higher rate than a college campus is so crazy, bro.
Twinkies would often end up there. It was the last stop on the line of a broken life for many, the plug hole of society that sucked in the tormented and traumatized. No gutter was deeper and dirtier than the east side of downtown.
Why is there a baby on the street?
These mean streets were a neglected and rejected gaping wound oozing human pus that presented some troubling questions about modern Western society. And because of Willie and his victims, soon those questions would have to be confronted. The women talked amongst themselves about this girl or that girl who went out for a job and never returned. The pimps started to wonder what was going on when this happened time and again. We're not talking about a handful of women here. We're talking about dozens of women over the years.
So
one of them was Rebecca
people,
Guno, who on a hot summer's day in 1983 vanished from downtown East Side, never to be seen again. By the time Vancouver's World Fair happened in 1986, aka Expo 86, more women had gone missing. Some of them last seen at the intersection of Main and Hastings, the bottom of Rock Bottom. A face often seen lurking around that intersection was Willie Picton, the weird guy who held those huge parties at his rundown farm. 43-year-old Sherry Rail went missing, followed by 33-year-old Elaine Auerbach, who told her buddies that she was moving to Seattle but never arrived. Then there was Teresa Ann Williams, a 26-year-old Aboriginal woman who went missing in July 1988, but was only reported missing in March 1989. There was a hiatus of over a year until a 40-year-old psychiatric patient named Ingrid Suet vanished. In 1992, 39-year-old Kathleen Watley went missing. There was another break, and 3 years later, 47-year-old Catherine Gonzalez vanished into thin air. She wasn't reported missing until February 9, 1996. It took 7 months for 32-year-old Catherine Knight to be reported missing.
And you literally wouldn't know. You couldn't find these people because they were eaten by pigs. So there was no bodies to find. You just had to hope you found skeletons. But he probably ate the bones of the skeletons, knowing him. Like, that's crazy.
Who disappeared shortly before Dorothy Spence, a 36-year-old Aboriginal woman. That Christmas, 23-year-old Diana Melnick also vanished. The youngest victim at the time was Stephanie Lee, a 20-year-old woman who just vanished after being treated for psychosis. Tanya Holyoke was just 24, and Olivia Williams was just 22 when they disappeared around the same time. Unbelievably, a woman named Janet Henry survived a close call in the 80s with a serial killer named Clifford Olson, and on June 28, 1997, she also disappeared. After a 29-year-old black woman named Sarah Jane DeFries vanished in 1998, police found her diary. In it, she'd written, "I feel like I've come a long way on my journey. I feel like I've overcome a lot of stuff. Inspector Kim Rossmo of the Vancouver Police figured around 40 women had gone missing, most of them from the downtown east side. Even so, police still weren't sure the many missing women had been murdered. Rossmo employed a new geographic profiling technique, but despite the huge number of deaths, the case never became a major murder investigation. It was believed such women often go missing and then turn up in some other place like LA or Vegas. The cops were very wrong, but they didn't even have one body at this point. They had no forensic evidence. It didn't help matters that some of the sex workers and the gangs and the pimps were reluctant to speak with them, for good reason of course. The police then went to the families of some of the missing women in an attempt to attain their DNA. They entered the DNA into databases in North America, trying to match it with the DNA of Jane Doe's from Alberta to Arizona. They checked the hospitals, mental health facilities, drug rehabilitation facilities, and witness protection programs, and they came up empty-handed.
I don't know why they never went to the party that all the prostitutes were disappearing at, and everyone was like, I don't know why y'all didn't think of, wasn't there this case where this guy stabbed their prostitutes, and doesn't he hold like huge parties with a bunch of prostitutes there? He's like right around the corner. He's like 20-30 minutes away, right? Maybe we should check there. Like that didn't run through their mind at all. Like maybe the guy who actually got caught stabbing a prostitute and holds parties with prostitutes, maybe he has something to do with something.
These women really had vanished off the face of the planet. And as the years passed, 97, 98, 99, more women disappeared. Julie Young, age 31, Angela Jardine, 28, Michelle Gurney, 30, Marcella Creason, 20. The latter was released from jail on December 27, 1998, and was not seen after. Her mother and her boyfriend waited for her at their apartment, where they cooked her a belated Christmas feast. Some men were questioned, men who had a history of violence, but none of them, it seemed, had anything to do with the disappearances. The cops checked the Downtown Eastside Youth Activities Society's bad date file, where women had filed many pages regarding men to avoid. Willie's name was not on that list, mostly because if you met him, you were dead. One thing the police should have done is listen to 37-year-old Bill Hiscox. This widower had almost lost his life through alcohol after his wife passed, but his sister saved him when she helped him land a job at P&B Salvage in Surrey, southeast of Vancouver. The owners of this firm were Robert William Willie Picton and David Picton. When Hiscox collected his weekly paychecks, he had to go to the Port Coquitlam pig farm, which he later described as a creepy-looking place where the equally creepy and quiet Willie Picton parked his beloved converted bus with deeply tinted windows. But what bothered Hiscox was the wild parties and the fact that so many sex workers turned up there. He'd read about the missing women in the newspapers.
So you see how he put together, he was like missing prostitutes. This guy has big parties with prostitutes. I mean, I'm not going to say he's like the reason they're disappearing, but like they could be disappearing here, you know what I'm saying? Like the people they could be disappearing with could be coming here since there's a bunch of prostitutes here. What a guess.
And when he heard about Willie's stabbing charge, he thought about something else.
Oh yes, and obviously the stabbing charge, the thing that makes it all sealed together.
What he told the police hotline was all the purses and IDs that are out there in his trailer and stuff. Hiscox first gave that information to the hotline anonymously, but later he met with a detective, a man we'll discuss in detail later. That detective told him that he'd push the investigation all the way to the top of the police force. But after that cop was transferred off the case, the brothers were filed as persons of interest and left alone.
He said that he saw the names of the missing people in their purses that were at the farm, and they...
The farm was not surveilled, which was a god-awful pity because Willie took a lot more women there in the 90s. In fact, cops were now pulling up names of missing women. There must have been over 50. Even so, it seemed at times the Vancouver Sun newspaper cared more about those women than the police. The cops were still unwilling to call this a serial murder case. If it were, it would have been the worst serial killing case in Canada's history. It took until 2001 for the police to finally form the Missing Women Task Force. By now, they had 54 missing women, possibly as many as 70, who all disappeared from the same area in the 80s and 90s. And so 18 years too late, Canada's largest murder investigation finally began. Even so, they still issued a statement to the public saying, "We are in no way saying there's a serial murderer out there. We're in no way saying that all these people missing are dead." It seemed to many people at the time, especially the women still working the streets, that the cops didn't want to admit they'd allowed a serial killer to remain loose for almost 2 decades. The Picton men's names stood out, both of whom had a rap sheet. They then looked at a 1998 report when Bill Hiscox had phoned Crime Stoppers about the farm. 14 more women had gone missing since then.
Yeah.
Police noted that Hiscox had accused Willie of being a sicko. He told them in 1998 about those 10 purses he'd seen with his own eyes, and he explained that Willie had once bragged about being able to easily dispose of bodies. He explained a friend of Willie's, the mixed-race Chinese Caucasian woman named Lisa Yeltsin, had told him that she'd seen women's bloody clothing at the farm, as well as various women's belongings. This was free hot dog Lisa from Willie's childhood. She suggested to Hiscox that the belongings might be Willie's trophies. Even worse, Hiscox heard that Willie got rid of these women with his meat grinder and possibly sold the meat to the public. That might have sounded like too much of a tall story back to the cops in '98, but in 2001,
she told them that in 98. They didn't start nothing until 01. They were told by 2 separate people. One person like, oh yeah, he has their persons, I see ID. Then the other one person said, oh, I seen these things laying around in in his room.
They realized they should look into this again. It wasn't until 2002 that there was a breakthrough, and even that was accidental. A rookie police officer was the first policeman to find something notable on the farm. It seemed the homicide detectives were
y'all only put them on let them go to the farm like once?
Stalling. But this rookie cop got a warrant to search the farm for illegal guns, not pieces of ground up women. He found the guns, but he also found a bunch of personal items belonging to women, including an asthma inhaler on which was printed the name of one of the missing women. So it was this young cop, who wasn't even on the murder case, that was the cause of the subsequent forensic search of the entire farm. A farm, by the way, that was
worth, if you're gonna look at it, at least read something.
About $70 million. Why this guy lived in such squalor, police just couldn't the subsequent forensic search of the entire farm. A farm, by the way, that was worth about $70 million.
70 M's? They were sitting on 70 M's?
Why this guy lived in such squalor, police just couldn't fathom. What they eventually found at the farm were the remains of at least 27 women, parts of them in the freezers and lots of them mulched up into pig feed.
Jesus.
Worse, it seemed to cops that Willie had used human flesh and whatever other parts for pork products. Even so, it wasn't until 2004 that officials appeared on TV warning Canadians they might well have become unwitting cannibals. Don't worry, said one official, explaining that they'd probably not get sick from it and then only possibly contract hepatitis B.
Hey guys, okay guys, look. So y'all may have eaten some human meat, but don't worry, you will not face any sickness. Maybe a little hepatitis if you don't cook it well, but you will not be sick. Okay? It's just a little human meat, nothing too crazy, okay? Don't overreact, guys.
If they hadn't cooked the pork well enough. Given the size of Willie's operation, there were a lot of sick Canadians for a few weeks after that announcement, especially when the Canadian government ordered a federal health risk assessment study to understand if people who ate the part human meat could have come into contact with viruses, bacteria, and parasites, or contracted diseases such as HIV and hepatitis. Both these diseases were very common in Vancouver among the highly stigmatized prostitutes. They concluded the risk was low to medium, but that didn't make people feel much better. Willie had been murdering and selling meat products for 20 years, so God knows how many people were reluctant cannibals if he had put victims into his products. It was a great time to be a vegetarian in the Vancouver area. People asked how the hell police had let this go on for so long. They'd heard about Hiscox and the fact that many women had died after he told police what he knew. Maggie Guile, known on the streets as Crazy Jackie, told the press 27 of her buddies were confirmed murdered and over 50 were missing. She added, there are many more that the police won't add to the list. Whole buildings of women have disappeared, but no one's looking for them. Many of the victims weren't white, which led to accusations of racism and sexism. One thing was for certain, those women were less dead in the eyes of the cops. Now let's talk about Willie's interrogation. At the station, Willie is quiet, giving 1 or 2 word answers to questions, only to explode with vivid descriptions of his past when he starts to talk about his dead calf or how his father was harsh with him. To his interrogators, he seems a few sandwiches short of a picnic, as the saying goes. Willie refers to himself as the pig man, seemingly impressed when telling investigators repeatedly that his face is in the newspapers. At one point, he stares at the poster board with pictures of dozens of missing women he's supposedly murdered and churned up, After being asked about them, he turns to Sergeant Bill Forty and says, "There's so many millions of people out there. They look so much alike, and everything else you know." Then he starts talking about how he was once mauled by a bull and another time chased by a black bear. Instead of discussing the case, he explains to the bemused cops, "That was a scary feeling, that one," referring to the bull attack. "Turn the other hoof, and if your arm's out there, rip your arm right off." Talking about once trying to split up
like we're talking about someone blabbering about absolutely nothing.
Two boars while fighting over a sow in heat. He excitedly explains, "I got in between them, and then they went after me. Got all slashed up." What on earth did the police have on their hands here? "Those are the good old days," Willie says. "Those are the days when I could say I got scars and really enjoyed myself, all black and blue." Detective Forty cuts in. "You do know you're never going back to that farm or that life." Willie then says there's nothing he likes about the farm anyway. Meanwhile, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police were saying that in the last 2 decades, 144 prostitutes had been murdered or are missing in British Columbia, with foul play
I thought it was 50. Tripled? That's preposterous. That is preposterous.
Soon, Vancouver will be sued for not doing their job. Families of victims will come forward to reprimand the cops, who certainly would not have acted in the same fashion had scores of middle-class women gone missing. The farm was fenced off as forensics did their job. It was thought many of the bodies had already been eaten or were possibly sitting in someone's freezer somewhere, in parts anyway. In Willie's house, they found what looked like instruments of torture, kinky devices, and syringes filled with liquid. They found parts of a woman in a wood chipper. It seemed that Willie had strangled most of them, possibly after knocking them out with a substance, maybe windshield cleaner, after which he slaughtered them the same way he did his pigs. According to the court transcripts, he told an undercover police officer, "I filled the syringes up with antifreeze, and you inject this stuff and you're dead in about 5 to 10 minutes. He also likely shot some of the victims, and many of them had their bones cut with Willie's handheld reciprocating saw. But many of the women, the very last shreds of them, were missing completely, leading some people to question if Slow Willie was being set up. Canadian news outlets did not discuss the very worst details. AP issued a report asking anyone who may still have frozen pork products.
I do not think that's the worst details. I think the worst details is he was kidnapping women and chopping them up. I think them being put in the food was actually not, I don't know. Maybe that's just me. But 144 missing women. Like, yes, the food thing is bad, but I think
Picton's farm to return those products to the police. More shock followed when a woman named Lynn Ellingson came forward and said she'd once seen Willie skinning a woman hanging from a meat hook.
I don't believe
She was blackmailed by Willie and didn't say anything anyway out of fear for her life, but the friend at the time had tipped off the police. This friend told them that Willie made strange meat, and he explained in detail how Ellingson had seen Willie strip a body down. She told him she was surprised when she saw that human fat was yellow, not white. The testimony sounded like the real thing. Detective Constable
So they told him and then they still didn't do it.
Lorimer Shenner was the one who took the tip and the one who'd first dealt with Hiscox in 1998. But he said as much as he wanted to search the farm, he couldn't because it fell under the jurisdiction of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. They apparently talked with Ellingson on 2 occasions, but each time she remained silent. Shenner later said that the RCMP visited the farm but were told to come back when Willie and David weren't so busy. For whatever reason, they actually did that. They interviewed Willie again, and he told them that they could search the farm, but according to Shenner, they never even returned. God knows why. The investigation was botched, with a capital B. Shenner said he had nightmares because of those missing women, and later he had to be taken off the case due to PTSD. This also slowed the investigation down, as Shenner was on to Willie more than anyone else was. In total, there were more than 40,000 photos taken of the crime scene. 235,000 items were taken from the farm, while the lab received a massive 600,000 exhibits. For the prosecution, 98 testified, and another 30 testified for the defense. It was a long and gruesome trial. Willie admitted to killing 49 women, but not at trial. He told an undercover officer while in custody that he wanted to make it 50. He was charged with killing 26 and convicted of just 6 murders. He was found innocent of first-degree murder, but guilty of second-degree murder, likely because the jury didn't think the prosecution had proved beyond any reasonable doubt that he'd planned the murders. The deputy chief constable of the Vancouver Police Department apologized.
He has 6 second-degree murders. He's still locked up forever, right?
"I wish from the bottom of my heart that we would have caught him sooner. I wish that all the mistakes that were made we could undo, and I wish that more lives would have been saved." More people came forward to say they knew Willie. Some had survived the usually deadly encounter with him. In 1985, he picked out a sex worker named Tracy Bunyan. He took her back to the disgusting trailer, which she immediately saw was stacked with women's clothes. Willie physically hurt her, but then drove her back to the city, warning her on the way that he was giving her one more chance to clean up her act, or she was getting it like the others. His belief that he was helping women was just an excuse to justify his
he was not helping nobody.
acts.
Can you have a shout out?
There were
Shout out
other
you,
survivors, such as Lenore, not her real name, a self-described hardcore alcoholic who was in and out of foster homes all her childhood, experiencing the most horrific kind of existence a child could have.
So basically, they botched the hell out of the investigation for this man. They were ignoring all tips and whatnot, and they did not care. Let's see what he got.
Sentenced Willie in the newspaper. In 2007, Judge Justice James Williams sentenced Willie to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 25 years.
Wait. So he said he murdered 49 people. Charged with 6 second degrees, but he said he killed 49 to the undercover, and he only got 20. He can get parole? He can get parole? Am I tweaking? Okay, sure. All right. I don't know what Canadians law system government thingy thing got going on over there, but that's kind of crazy. I'm not gonna lie to you.